Yeah, can everyone see my screen again?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, great. And also, am I audible and clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
Yes,
great.
Doctor.
Yeah, so I will, and like I said, my title is fairly long. It says, and it sounds like it's dealing with a fairly complex issue to balance science and, sorry, I have something on my screen. Sorry, just give me a moment.
No problem.
Yeah, so this is something that's been on my mind. I come from a fairly, sort of pure science background, and only maybe in the last 5-6 years have I gotten into more applied science. And so this is something that's been on my mind, a sort of challenge to, how to bridge or balance science and practice. And again, to sort of set the stage and make sure we're all on the same page, I will break down this title and go sort of one by one. So the first thing is, okay, let's talk about the elephantine challenge. Again, this entire talk will be in the context of elephants and Lantana. And so the elephantine challenge here is Lantana itself. For those who don't know, Lantana camara is one of the top 10 most invasive species in the world. It is native to the neotropics and was introduced to this region in the 1800s. And so it's currently found throughout India, Africa, Australia, Oceania, and so on. It was, of course, brought as an ornamental plant because it looks really pretty. It has nice flowers. This is a picture I just pulled off the internet where, we are selling it in India in nurseries for like 15 rupees a bag. And even yesterday, a friend of mine found this in her parents' garden, unassuming and innocent. And because she knew what it was, she immediately took it and destroyed it. And, countries have tried to manage this problem and to eradicate this weed for more than 100 years now with very little success. And you'll see why. So, why really is Lantana a problem? What do I mean when I say that it is an invasive species? Invasive species, it has these, traits that allow it to spread. So this plant is highly adaptable. It's very tolerant to temperature conditions, soil conditions, water conditions. It's allelopathic. That means it has certain chemical properties that prevent other plants from growing. So it actually has a negative effect on other native natural vegetation. It's highly resistant to all of these removal methods that people have tried, for more than 100 years. It has this trait where the reproductive cycle and it rapidly spreads. So birds help disperse the seeds. They eat the fruits and disperse the seeds. Pollination, of course, is helped by bees and butterflies and other insects. This plant also shows phenotypic plasticity, and this means that it can take on different phenomorphs. So in some areas in India, it will be a shrub. In some parts, it can actually become a climber and climb on top of trees and suppress the canopy from there. It also has no natural enemies here in India. So it comes from, again, like I said, it evolved in places like Brazil and was brought here and has just sort of run amok. No natural enemies in a plant sense also means that nothing is really eating the plant. So while the fruits are being eaten by birds, no herbivores actually are able to eat the leaves or other parts of the plant because it also has toxins in it. And all of these, I think amazing evolutionary traits have, unfortunately, what they do is they reduce the natural forage available for herbivores. So there's not enough food that animals can actually eat because this is toxic. So this tends to push herbivores out of forests. So like, of course, the other thing to keep in mind is forests themselves are reducing in size and are being fragmented severely due to various issues. And so animals are already coming out of forests, but this additional thing of a lack of something to eat is also getting animals move out. And of course, there are croplands that they are attracted to because they get easy, good, nutritious food. It also endangers communities. So because there is this increased interaction between animals like elephants and humans as they come out of forest, there is injuries and deaths on both sides. And the spread of lantana within forest also affects the livelihoods of communities. Communities that would have traditionally depended on the forest in many ways. They would go in and collect amla, for example, and there are studies that show that that collection of amla, for example, has reduced significantly, and it affects their livelihood. There are also significant economic losses. So because again, animals are coming out, there is a lot of crop damage. Livestock health, there are goats and sheep that by mistake eat this plant and apparently also show signs of toxicity. And again, like I mentioned, the non-timber forest produce like amla or other things that communities depend on in the forest. So this is if I have not got this through, this is an extremely severe problem, and it is spreading at a rate that's sort of beyond our control. Sorry, somebody saying something?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Here are just a couple of pictures. This is taken from Atree's work, which shows you how dense the thicket can really be and how difficult it is to move through for people or for animals. There are also studies or common wisdom basically saying that it's difficult for animals to move through because it forms such dense thickets. Here's a tiger in an entirely lantana infested undergrowth. So lantana also prevents other plants from growing, right? Because it forms such a dense canopy that sunlight is hard to come through, and underneath is just barren. Many people have tried to map the spread of this. Now, because this is of such global concern, this is a study done in 2014. We have Africa, India, and Australia. And the interesting thing here is typically when a species evolves in a particular climate. So in this case, lantana evolves in the neotropics under a certain temperature condition, certain soil condition, rainfall, etc. And they tend to retain those traits. So if a new area where they're introduced has similar conditions, similar climatic conditions, then it encourages them to grow faster. What is interesting and scary is for India, this study shows actually that lantana is able to grow and spread at much higher temperatures outside of its niche. So up to like 36, 37 degrees more, sorry, not 36 degrees more, but at 36, 37 degrees, like these plants are able to grow and spread outside of their niche, which is basically expanding their niche. And the other thing, of course, is to remember that, apart from all the other, this excellent suite of adaptability traits, this plant also has several varieties. So Lantana camara is one species, but it has so many different varieties. And there are also other species and subspecies that adapt really quickly to different conditions. To give you an idea of the scale, in Australia, the current spread is something like 5 million hectares. In Africa, it's about 2 million hectares. And in India, about 13 million hectares. And managers everywhere have been and continue to struggle with how to control this. This is just one more study that shows, so in the native, in the neotropics, lantana grows best at this temperature, but in India, lantana is also able to really respond well at very high temperatures. And this is scary because as we are experiencing climate change and just the heat wave that we are all facing right now at this moment, I hope everybody is hydrated. And I think that this really raises concern under the world that we are today, and that the spread is just going to become a lot more. This study mapped, oops, sorry. So this map, if you can just look at India's map, blue is where Lantana is currently absent, or low, and basically shows the potential area where Lantana could spread. And this is a model that shows what regions are currently suitable for invasion of Lantana, which is literally all of the Paleotropics. I can't seem to, sorry. I'm sorry. Let me just share my screen again. Yeah, so there have been, like I mentioned, a lot of efforts towards the removal of this plant, but this typically takes a lot of effort, a lot of money, and the pace at which the removal is happening is clearly no match for the spread of the species. So this is a picture from, I think, 2017 or so, where elephants in Mudumalai were employed, the camp elephants were employed to actually remove Lantana. This is a picture of the local community. These are Beta Kurumbas who have again been employed to remove Lantana. And in some cases, departments across the country have also previously used large machines like JCBs that would go in and just basically remove the plant. And there are problems with the JCB, although it can cover a large area quickly. The problem is it basically destroys that entire area because the soil is so significantly disturbed, and a lot of native vegetation, small saplings would get killed in the process. And studies have also shown that if there's such movement, so much soil movement, it also actually encourages Lantana seeds in the ground to grow faster. So that's not really helpful. And so we resort to slower methods like maybe manual methods like this, which of course is slow and really labor intensive. I'm sure Tarsh would be happy to talk about some interesting innovations that he's been making towards kind of bridging this to making smaller machines and all that. We can talk about it later. Here is an example of forest departments, various people who have removed Lantana and they upturn it. So there are studies, systematic scientific research has shown that the best method to remove Lantana would be to cut it at the rootstock, which is a little bit below the soil. If you cut it just at the stem, this plant again has this amazing ability to copice, which basically means put out more branches and more fruits and more seeds. So you actually have to go below the soil to cut it. And then it is suggested that you upturn it so that the root doesn't touch the soil and you don't have more flushing out. And then, of course, once it's all dry, this biomass has to be removed from the forest. This, again, of course, does not do anything about the seeds that are already in the seed bank in the soil. So again, like I mentioned, removal methods are typically very intensive, use a combination of manual and or machine. As of 2019, based on the spread at that time, the cost estimate for just removal would be about $5.5 billion, which is something like 10 times the budget allocated to the ministry in that year. So this really feels impossible. This kind of removal effort takes consistent effort. It has to be long-term, because if you just remove it 1 year, it's not gone. It keeps coming back, and so you have to keep doing this. And often site-specific adaptive management strategies are required, because something that works in one place may not necessarily work in another place. This is a quote from Shola tribal elder in BRC, who says, today the scent of the jungle is gone. Plants don't grow well. Even grass doesn't grow. And today we, the Girijana, we have diseases. Animals have diseases. Today you see elephants, they look weak. They are just a bag of bones. They don't get enough food. There's nothing left in the forest. All we have is lantana. And this is, 100% true. If you just, I recently went to BRT and it just feels like a wall of lantana. There are native trees that, stand in between, but for the most part, it is just lantana. And this is true of several parts of the country. So with that, hopefully I've given you a background of lantana and why it is such a big problem today. And I'll move on to the next big topic. The next big subject is elephants. Elephants don't really need an introduction to this group here, since you're all friends of the elephants and have had talks for a lot of years now. But again, if there are a few other people, to sort of, again, make sure we're all on the same page. Asian elephants are endangered. Their populations have decreased significantly. There's a lot of habitat loss. They are now restricted to only 15% of their original habitat. Of course, African elephants are also under severe threat and their habitats have reduced too. But for this talk, of course, I will stick to the Asian elephants. This is a map that most people have seen, I'm sure. As of 2011, if you see the orange part, that was this historical spread. But as of 2011, the green is what the elephants are restricted to nowadays. Today. And just to bring home the point, major threats to elephants in India are due to habitat loss and forest fragmentation, which basically leads to increased human interaction. So these are wide-ranging species. They need a lot of space. They can spend most of 24 hours foraging, and so they need to move from place to place in order to access these resources. And they also tend to migrate with seasons. And so because there is habitat loss, most of the population is either found outside protected areas or they at least use areas outside protected areas to move from one place to the other. And so they come across maybe linear infrastructure like this road here or railways, and just basically human use areas or human dominated landscapes where they come into regular contact with people. Every year there are about 100 to 300 humans and 40 to 50 elephants killed during crop raiding. There's also a concern among some people that elephants may become to be viewed as a nuisance. This would seem a little, incongruous with our, as a country, we tend to take pride in, our cultural relationship with nature and especially with elephants. But there are also, the most vulnerable communities are the ones who are experiencing the most significant losses. And I think that's something to remember. And all of these various issues cause damages amounting to, several $1 million. Going to share a few images. Again, many of you might have seen these. This is an example from Valparai, which has a lot of tea gardens, and NCF has been working there for several years. They've developed a great system of early warning, which, somebody's walking through an area, they see an elephant, an SMS alert goes to everyone, so they make sure they don't go by that or they avoid that area. And so all these different organizations and different people are coming up with ways to manage these interactions on a sort of day-to-day basis. There's no real long-term solution in sight because the problem, I feel, is as such. This is again an infamous photo where this is in Assam and people had basically lit firecrackers to chase elephants away from their areas. Elephants attempting to cross a railway line. Observations have shown that, they actually take some time and, watch and observe and very calculatedly try to cross the railway tracks when it does come to that. And work in the ground, even in WWF and other organizations, have shown they tend to use specific points. So it's not the entire stretch. There might be parts where it's easy for them to climb, parts where a trench is dug. So we have the option of channeling elephant movement if it comes to that, of sort of creating corridors. And I'll talk about corridors in a little bit. Just a few more images of of just, communities taking things, having to chase animals and keep guard over there. Here is a picture of a banana plantation that was mostly destroyed by this elephant overnight. And hopefully I've conveyed some sense of urgency to this problem, right? So when we have elephants and lantana, how do we connect these two? Very simplistically put, the more lantana there is in forest, less amount to eat. Elephants come out, interact with humans, and there's loss and death on both sides. Now, as an endangered species, there is a need for significant protection and conservation measures for the elephant, while also there is a need to eradicate lantana and sort of restore native habitats. I don't think that we talk about restoration of native habitats as much as we do about just removal of invasive species. Okay, so now it kind of comes to the science and practice. The two things that I think are again a little, they work on different scales, and so as conservationists, we need to figure out how best to balance these two things, because just one on its own is not good enough. Now, scientific research is what it actually does, how science helps and why it's important. It generates information through systematic objective sampling of nature, of reality, so that we are able to interpret that and arrive at something that's close to the truth. This information is a fact-based, science-based. It helps inform decisions, inform policy, inform management strategies. And of course, this is general wonderment in understanding how nature works, which is always nice to know. And of course, these solutions are then applied on the ground. They help further research and scientific knowledge, which again feeds back into adding more information and really understanding the natural world and trying to ask these extremely relevant questions, pertinent questions that help us deal with the various challenges that we face on the ground as applied scientists or conservationists. Now, science typically takes time. It takes time to collect data. It takes time to set up an experiment. It takes time it's important sometimes to collect data across seasons or across years in order to actually arrive at something that's meaningful, that's close to the truth. And so anybody who's doing any kind of scientific research know that patience is utmost, and anybody who works with scientists also have to have a lot of patience, because science takes time. Meanwhile, we have this other side. We have practice, which of course also uses science. There's a lot of existing scientific knowledge, but also uses a lot of common knowledge, several years of experience and wisdom, and it helps respond to urgent on-ground challenges. And this is very important, because not everything can wait for a scientific study to be done to give really clear-cut instructions. But if they are fairly certain or have a fairly good understanding, that they can respond to something immediately on ground. This has some sort of side effects. They typically tend to be a little ad hoc, because there's not usually proper follow-up or systematic monitoring after they respond to it. So we don't really have data currently on what the impact has been of certain interventions that either organizations have done or departments have done. Follow-up is really not practiced as often as it should. And so this tends to be a quick fix. And really, how do we balance the two? Because we really do need both. And I will plug in the project here, which I think is why Mr. Sanjay Verma also reached out to me to talk about this. Is a project that we just started in BRT. And I think the key thing to note is that there is a collaborative project. So if you see the 4 logos on the side, this is a project with A3, WWF, NCBS, and the Shola Trust. And I'll talk about it again later, but this kind of collaboration is so important. This knowledge sharing is so important, especially as we try to tackle a problem, you know, as big as this is. Again, like I mentioned, we are not just, see, removal has been studied a lot. We know what methods are most efficient at removing lantana. But how do we really restore the habitat with native vegetation? How do we tackle this problem of lantana seed bank and give native grasses, native vegetation a fighting chance to come back? So this is a scientific experimental design to help figure out what the best method would be. And so it's pretty, it's got a, you know, stringent systematic design. But again, at the end of this, you know, what we want to be our final goal is to be able to tell the department, come up with a method that they can actually apply at scale. Because this issue of lantana and elephant is one of scale, without a doubt. There's a reason why they would send JCBs before, because it's hectares after hectares after hectares of just lantana. So what method can they actually apply where they can manage this at those scales and also with minimal intervention? Because you can't have hundreds of people going in every day and clearing it manually with a sickle. That just makes no sense and is no match for the scale of the problem. And so this study, what we want to be able to come up with is give them a method that is scalable with minimal intervention and is most effective at removing lantana, but also really restoring the native natural habitat again. We don't have any data really to share because we literally just started this last month. But I can give you an idea of how we sort of designed this study. You don't have to go into too much detail, but we have treatment plots and control plots. In the control plots, we won't really do anything. But in the treatment plots, we are trying a combination of treatments. Now, if you see, one will just be we remove the lantana using that established cut rootstock method. A second plot will have where we remove the lantana and then add native seeds. So we are supplementing because the assumption is that the seed bank is currently saturated with lantana seeds and we want to supplement native grass seeds. So we add seeds and see if they are able to come up. A third treatment is removal of the lantana and then do a cool season burn. Now fire is very interesting because there are studies that show that, I think historically in all these landscapes, fire used to be a natural thing. There are community members who will tell you that they used to do controlled burns even themselves in order to collect NTSPs, but they had very clear rules. They would do it only in a particular season. They would know to what extent they would have to do it. And they also knew the effect of these fire, that fire would actually help regenerate more grass, which, again, helps herbivores. It generates a very productive habitat. And maybe from the 1970s or 1980s, a lot of, because since our Protection Act came about, there's a lot of strict no fire policies that are there in some landscapes. So there are some areas, of course, like Kaziranga and maybe Kanha protected areas where the forest department itself uses fire as a management tool. They do control burns in order to maintain grasslands because grasslands support rhinos. And they are one of the last remaining habitats for rhinos. So they practice this. And unfortunately, in parts of like the southern Western Ghats, fire is typically not allowed. And so what we want to try is with this, after we remove the lantana, if we do a cool season burn, this is not really to burn the lantana because we've removed it all. In fact, that would actually be dangerous because it provides a lot of fuel and biomass. But what we want to do with this cool season burn is kill the lantana seeds in the soil. And again, there might be different intensities of fire that would kill a certain proportion or a sufficient proportion of the seeds in the soil. We don't have this information yet. And then, of course, we have one last treatment where it combines the two. So we remove lantana, do a cool season burn to reduce the number of lantana seeds, and then add or supplement native grass seeds. And of course, we'll do baseline. So before we do any treatments, we collect various vegetation metrics and of course, wildlife usage data to see what it's like before we do the treatment and what it's like after we do these treatments. And the current proposal is to do it for at least 3 years because that's just how long it takes for vegetation to respond. It's how long it usually takes much longer for wildlife to really start to respond to the vegetation, but we are bound by funding and logistics. So currently the plan is to at least be able to monitor it for 3 years. I think with that, I'm just going to lean in towards maybe where the conversation would go with Tarsh. But where I stand, I see that when we have these kinds of challenges, that I think really the way forward is to have simultaneous approaches. So because it is an issue of scale and time, collaboration is absolutely the way forward, and with community, because it helps bridge science and that common knowledge and that wisdom that I was talking about. A project like what I just described we are trying to do in DRC is only possible because we have people like Uncle Hiremat or Jai Sri Ratnam from these different institutions who have studied lantana for like their life. Their life work is vegetation, plant dynamics, how plants respond to different treatments, different climatic conditions. And any one organization may not have all of the knowledge. And so it's important to build this kind of a community and have this knowledge exchange that helps us tackle these problems together. It's also important with regard to elephants because they also face so many other threats. Even if we were able to clear all of the lantana in India, for the native habitat to actually regenerate, it would take a long time. Meanwhile, elephants are still going to be coming out of forests. Meanwhile, forests are still going to be fragmented and reduced. And so simultaneously, we also have to be working on these other threats to elephants. For example, WWF and of course several other organizations work to identify and secure functional corridors. So here is an example. This is the Sigur corridor, which is a plateau that connects Nilgiris, Mudumalai, Satyamangalam, Bandipur, and all these tiger reserves, and allows for genetic exchange between various animal populations. And together, this particular landscape supports one of the largest populations of Asian elephants. And there was a lot of encroachments. There was resorts, and so in order to first identify that this is a functional corridor, there was a lot of science work that went into it. It took time to collect camera trap data, to actually establish that elephants were using this corridor, using this particular path to move between these areas. There were collared elephants that gave information. There were camera traps that gave information, regular monitoring that gave information, collected systematically over time, with which we were able to show that this is a corridor and actually have it declared as a corridor. There was also the Kallar corridor again, which is currently, it has been announced that it is a corridor, and that the Highways Department is currently working on suggestions of maybe building a roadway to again minimize interactions or having elephants come in contact with vehicles. So things like that are also, and elephants get electrocuted. There are that's something else that there are organizations that are working on, including WWF. So there are all these different, simultaneously we have to work from all these different angles. Something else that is urgent is to develop and implement invasive species policies. So for example, Tamil Nadu recently announced that there's an invasive species policy. Again, in India, in many countries, there's no dearth of making documents and publishing stuff, but it is the implementation is where it usually fails. And this is key to actually implement some of this. These policies are based on a lot of science, a lot of well-informed decisions and people with years of experience. And so there's a lot of power in actually implementing these policies. We also have to continuously update information and our practice, our management strategy. And of course, I think, while it's sometimes hard for maybe managers to understand that science takes time, it's also important, I think, to recognize that for both parties to recognize the importance of each other and to sort of help and synergize and solve some of these issues. We already have some speed breakers ahead. So even as we tackle this Lantana problem, there are several other invasive species that are taking over the landscape. We were recently in Wayanad, and it's like a forest of senna, spectacularly. These are taking over. These can grow into big trees, and they provide a lot of shade. There is wattle that's taking over in Shola grasslands, which are by itself an endangered habitat type. And so this is, the way the world is currently, with so much movement across continents, people, things. I think that it is only likely and expected that there will be such a big invasive species problem, not just in plants, but so many other species as well, with smuggling and with illegal trade. This is bound to happen. And so there really is a need to recognize that any kind of conservation approach or philosophy has to be adaptive. It has to be proactive and predictive. While we have the power of these predictive models and mapping, technologies, and we can preemptively act on so many things. And I think that is really the need of the hour. I don't know how much time I took, but I'm going to sort of stop here. And I will stop sharing the screen. I don't know if there's a moderator who will sort of deviate into the conversation with that.
Yeah, first of all, thanks a lot, Divya. I think that was a very insightful presentation on Lantana, problems associated with Lantana, and also challenges with respect to removal of Lantana, and also linking problems that is caused by Lantana to different species, not only elephants, but the different species. So so thanks a lot for that. So then we can just move on to the next part of a presentation, that is the conversation between Dr. Tarsh and Dr. Divya. So I would like to thank Tarsh. I think he lost his internet connectivity and he had to travel a certain distance to actually make it finally. So thanks a lot, Dr. Tarsh. I hope you are safe now because it's evening and I hope you're safe. So thanks a lot for joining. And so yeah, so I think both of you can take over.
Wow, Tarsh, where are you?
So I'm outside in a public place under a street light on a mountain, getting a little bit of mobile signal, and I'm talking from there. So yeah, sorry, I missed the first part of the conversation because I lost internet connectivity at home, and I don't have much mobile connectivity. So Sanjay, are you going to moderate this conversation? How is this going to happen?
Hi, Tarsh. Hi, Dr. Tarsh and Dr. Vidya. I think how we can do is we can have this as a free flow conversation, okay? Because we don't have much of questions, so we can have a free flow conversation between both of you, and followed by that, I can jump in with some set of questions that we have put together as a team of volunteers. So I think you both can start and have a conversation about the Lantana and elephants with respect to our subject. Just a word of caution, we can keep an eye out for you, Tarsh. So just look around, or we can look around if there are elephants, behind. So, yeah.
Yeah, don't worry. I think it's fine. So I think, yeah, Divya and me have talked a lot about Lantana and elephants. So trying to frame a conversation about things we've spoken extensively about, maybe a little challenging. But maybe I could respond with a few kind of thoughts from the presentation, and yeah, we'll see how it goes from there. Maybe Divya, any other thoughts?
Sounds good. No, sounds good, Tarsh.
Yeah. So yeah, off the top of my head, I think the first question that's always put to me is, what is the connection between Lantana and human-elephant conflict? And traditionally, my answer always has been there is no paper published on this. It's very hard to make direct causal links saying that Lantana is taking over forests and therefore elephants are coming out and therefore there's more conflict. But like Divya said, this is a very kind of common sense thing that for most people, pragmatically, they all agree. And this is, I think, a challenge of science I have no easy answers. Something that is common sense to people. Do you need a rigorous kind of in-depth study, and how you'll design such a study is quite a challenge to prove conclusively that elephants are coming out more because of Lantana. Off the top of our head, we can easily say 20 to 40% of all the parks are taken over by Lantana. That much area is unusable to animals, elephants in particular. And so it is possible that they're moving out. But the key unanswered question is, what is the time scale over which this was invaded, right? Has it been this way for 100 years or 20 years or 50 years or whatever time frame? And over that time frame, how has elephants changed? So yeah, I think this is a big challenge. Divya, any thoughts on how we could kind of answer a question like this? And do we need to answer a question like this before we act on policy, or can we just assume that it's common sense and we don't need the science?
Yeah, I mean, I'm never going to say we don't need the science. That's just where I come from also. But I think it's worth thinking about whether, you know, whether so much effort has to go into answering this question from a scientific point of view. I think it's worth thinking about it because there is a paucity of time, there is a paucity of funds, there is a paucity of energy, and things can always be prioritized differently. I agree that there is enough common knowledge already. So like you're saying, there's common sense that can inform some of these decisions that we take. But my answer would again be to have simultaneous things. You know, if we are able to somehow, let's say as the scientist, the science, you know, sort of person, I'll say that I'm willing to compromise, you know, a little bit. So instead of doing a 10-year study, which is what I think it would actually take to monitor wildlife usage, instead of doing a 10-year study, I'm willing to do a 3-year study so that I can come up with, or I can generate results that are still useful and still relevant within 3 years, because in 10 years, this problem might just become something else. So there's a need for, I think, as a scientist to sort of come halfway. And I think there's a need for, while we can already start acting on things, like we already know what the best method is for removal, so go ahead and remove it. We already know not to use giant JCBs, so don't use it. So some of these things are already known, and we can start implementing those on the side, you know. Can we have both of these things going together?
Yeah, thanks, Divya. That's quite a nice kind of balanced answer. Not kind of dissing science in any way, but holding it up and saying we'll find a nice compromise. But I think, yeah, this is an overall challenge that science and management will always have to deal with in terms of what do we know. Because, when I remember very clearly when I started, not really a full-time scientist at all, more working in conservation about 12, 15 years ago. Dr. John Singh I met in the field, and he was like, oh, all these scientists are going crazy now with all data. They don't use common sense, they only use data. And to me, at that time, I was like, wow, this is very insightful. Yeah, we should use common sense first. But the key is that common sense can very often be wrong. So you almost have to use your common sense to say first, assume Lantana is a problem and think about it. And then think Lantana is not a problem and think about how you could kind of logically think through those two very opposite positions. And then decide if the sense is really common or if it's not really common. And then maybe think carefully about whether science needs to be applied more rigorously to answer these questions. Because for a lot of questions in conservation, what is common sense is not really common sense. Two different people may have two very uncommon sense. So yeah, that's a really interesting challenge that I think conservation has to deal with a lot, because it's a relatively new science, or more, it's a new discipline of practice. So it'll be interesting to see how all of this pans out in the years to come.
I think this point you mentioned also says that with science comes objectivity that is often lacking in if we are only going to go based on common science, right? That's because we have humans, I mean mankind, we just have unknown or unconscious biases and prejudices, and that it's not really intentional, but sometimes it has sort of influences our choices and decisions, and so it's good to have science to keep a check on that.
Yeah, absolutely. There were a couple of questions. Do we want to quickly look at those?
So I think they may want to do the questions. I thought they were going to do it, but before we go to the questions, I have one thought for you, Tarsh. So in my talk, I had actually mentioned, I don't know if you caught it, but I had mentioned that we actually sort of have to use these different approaches. So one approach, and of course in the poster for this talk as well, there is the Lantana elephants that are there, and I also had it in one of my slides, and I did not talk about it at all in my presentation, and I would really like for you to just tell people very briefly why or where that idea really came from and what you hope to do with that idea.
Thank you so much. I was about to start with that, because we haven't really touched based on that entire concept, So the audience would love to hear that. Just to give you a kind of a caveat that there are many people, we have this set of audience, which is Dr. Divya said, come across from different walks of life, and many of them don't join the timings, and they go and they retrieve the videos from the YouTube, So it would be very helpful for them who would be watching it later. So if you can just briefly explain the whole concept from, from the conceptualization to actual what it stands today.
Thanks. I think explaining the whole thing from the beginning to now, all that's gone into it, will be quite challenging. I think I will try to very quickly summarize. So elephants and Lantana were two areas of interest, two of the biggest kind of problems on the ground here in Gudlur, Mudumalai, this area. Completely disparate. There was no overlap between the work we were doing on Lantana was very much inside protected areas, mapping the spread of Lantana, trying to understand the history of the plant, that kind of thing. And our work on elephants was completely outside, trying to understand personality in elephants and how elephants was different from each other. Project almost came about slightly by chance. There were some people I knew in the UK as I was finishing my PhD who did very successful fundraisers using life skies, using sculptures of elephants. They had small fiberglass elephants actually that they used to paint with, get famous people to paint and auction it. And I told them, why don't you all try to make the elephants itself with the material that's very nice. We were doing Lantana furniture at the time. And it'll be nice if we could make elephants with that. Yeah, this conversation started in maybe 2014, 15, and they were very excited. We had a real challenge in trying to, how do you actually make elephants? So because we had thousands of photos of elephants from all angles based on our research, my wife and a partner who's a designer, she used to make large size puppets, like larger than life puppets. So we kind of roped her in. She had the knowledge on how we could possibly do this. So we started off making the elephants. Yeah, that's the story. And they've been in public exhibitions now in many parts. There was a small exhibition in Bangalore also at Tarsh with about 10, 15 elephants for 2 weeks. But hopefully there'll be a bigger one in a public place like Cubbon Park or something later in the year. So there are large scale public events. There was one in Cochin around the Biennale 2 years ago. There was one in London. That was a big one. That was a very famous one as well. About 120 elephants were in the central London parks. And basically the idea is, yeah, it generates a very good livelihood for tribal communities who make the elephants. It takes each elephant is based on a real wild elephant, and it takes people, a team of 6 people, 6 weeks to make it. It raises the profile of Lantana, which I think is very important. A lot of people don't know about it, but when they see these elephants, as immediately, okay, it's not really a wooden elephant, it's not a cane elephant, what is it? And so lots of people know about Lantana. To be very honest, does not clear that much Lantana from the forest. When communities make furniture, they only cut a few stems or they cut a few plants. It's not a significant way of clearing large amounts of Lantana from the forest, but it has cleared some amount of Lantana. And most importantly, the public exhibitions themselves are titled Coexistence, because they are, I mean, the world is full of hearing about conflict and conflict and conflict. But to me, like in a Goodlur perspective, interactions are problematic. All the rest of the time, like people go to protected areas to see elephants. Even local people here actually just stop their work and watch elephants with great joy. So we were trying to celebrate this idea of coexistence and bring that into the conservation narrative much more. There's a consortium of people working on coexistence around the country who we brought together. There's a website called coexistenceconsortium.com that talks about this. And yeah, the elephants are finally auctioned for hopefully large amounts of money. And all the funds that are raised from that goes back into conservation projects in India, coexistence project, looking at how people and elephants can better share space. Yeah, that is quite a long answer, even though it was intending to be short, but that's the story of the Lantana elephants. And hopefully you'll see them around more in big public exhibitions in Bangalore and other places.
Yes, absolutely. I had said this in person to Dr. Tarsh, and I would like to put it on the platform also. It's a very, very inspiring. The one part is conceptualizing, giving out a solution. Second part is working on that solution and seeing it as I would say, a success story. Getting that fund, putting back into the research, conservation activities. It's a whole lot of deal because the way Dr. Divya has put it across that it's a mammoth, it's a giant problem which is not going to be solved, just by a couple of people, a couple of organizations, and a small period of time. So it's truly inspiring, I must say, Dr. Tarsh. And just to move forward, I would like to take the questions which have come from the audience. To begin with, Kavita Prakash, and thank you so much for asking this question. She has put it across saying that hasn't government banned its sale from nurseries? So she's talking about Lantana. And the question came, and I would like to go back to the common sense, that whole discussion around that. I was like, why Lantana would be there on sale? And I myself went on Google and seen it, and I was amazed. Like so many members on Amazon, they're selling. It's exotic plant at the end of the day. And I was like, no, this is like a small word. It's common sense. It would have been already taken care of. So thank you so much, Kavita, asking this question. And I would throw it back to Dr. Divya and Dr. Tarsh. So I am absolutely ignoring that, it would be on sale, but it is on sale. So how would you respond? A, it's on sale. B, are we doing anything on that front from a policy point of view? Is government is aware about this part of it? So please, either of you can take it or both of you can take it.
Tarsh, go ahead.
Yeah. No, yeah, go ahead. Maybe I would. Oh, yeah.
Okay, so I also saw that question, and it's interesting. I'm sure the government knows about it. I'm actually not aware if there is a rule out there that prevents them from selling this at nurseries. I'm not sure. Maybe Tarsh knows, but it is true that you can widely buy Lantana. So for example, in I think it was somewhere in Australia where they had actually banned the sale of Lantana. So because they recognized that it was a problem, Lantana cannot be sold in nurseries. And I think clearly that's something, right here, I'm currently based in Coimbatore, and a very interesting thing happened some time ago where they are beautifying these lakes, right? And as part of the beautification, they were planting these flowering shrubs on the sides, and somebody came across and said, like, this is Lantana. Why are you planting Lantana? And they didn't know. And so, then of course, we had to tell them that, we on one side, the forest department is really struggling to get rid of these And on the other side, we have city corporations who are somehow disconnected from it and just look at it as a pretty ornamental plant and unknowingly plant it. Tarsh, do you know if there's actually some rule out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think near the edge of Bandipur and places like that, I think near the edge of forests, they're a little careful about plants. And it's not Lantana itself, but I feel I was really surprised, very pleasantly surprised. The forest department checks all the plants you're planting in your garden. If there are any invasives that could spread into the park. I think that's a very good thing for them to do. On Lantana in particular, I mean, I've grown to be a great admirer of this plant after the last 15, 20 years of studying it and working with it and trying to eradicate it. And I have to say, I have a slightly different view about Lantana in nurseries. It's an exceptional garden plant and it's maybe okay to plant it for two reasons. One is there are, say, the South Indian parks alone, there's maybe 2,000 square kilometers of dense Lantana. All the Lantana and all the urban centers put together will not be even 1 square kilometer of Lantana. So it's not going to be that the urban plants ever spill into the forest. The forest is already jam-packed full of Lantana everywhere. There are almost no areas that don't have Lantana presence, right? That's one. But if we start eradicating and we start successfully, I wouldn't say eradicating, but at least clearing large areas of Lantana, then you have to think of this problem much more carefully. Otherwise, from an urban perspective, there's water shortage in all the cities and all. It's better to plant Lantana that doesn't need anything and very hardy than plant some very posh azaleas or lilies or some of these fancy plants that need a lot
you're
more
giving
care
the wrong
and water.
idea. Don't encourage this.
I'm bear with me. But anyway, so I feel like in the long term, we should address this. We should not have Lantana in large areas in nurseries. But in the short term, I don't see it as a huge problem for conservation. But the second point is that Lantana is a cultivar. I mean, it's like a species complex of almost 600 different cultivars, right? So it's not that all Lantana is the same. Most Lantana you get in nursery is this orange, it's either yellow or red or a purple or a white. Those don't actually fruit. They can only propagate vegetatively. So those orange ones are not, those yellow ones you see, unless somebody takes a piece and goes plants it in the forest, it's not going to spread by birds, which is the way Lantana spreads in the forest. So again, the risk of these colorful Lantanas invading the forest is very low. It's this Lantana hybrid or the species complex which we see in the forest, which should not be planted maybe in large areas near forest fringes that are being cleared. And I'd be particularly careful in areas where there isn't much Lantana. Let's say this, like some places in Andhra, for example, Jayashri was saying, Sri-Salem Tiger Reserve, those kind of places, there are huge areas uninvaded. There you should definitely not allow anybody around to plant Lantana or any other invasive plants. I think this Bandipur buffer zone kind of approach of anybody close to a forest, you have to check whatever they plant, any new plant they bring in has to be cleared by the park. I think that's the approach we need because it's not just Lantana, right? There's Cromolina, there's Parthenium, there are so many others. There's Upansha, there are 5, 6 others. Lantana is the biggest problem now. If you just ban Lantana and 10 years from now, we start clearing Lantana and then Upansha starts taking over instead, the problem is not solved. So I think overall approach of being careful about what species we plant in our gardens and being more aware of that is a better approach than just this, let's just ban Lantana. I quite like Lantana. I have all the 4 colorful Lantanas outside my house, I have to say, because I just want to watch it growing and see how different it is from the wild one. That's the other thing. Like the wild ones in 1 year, they grow so much. These colorful ones don't grow like that as vibrantly. Yeah, thanks. That was a long answer, but yeah.
No, it's an interesting answer. I would put it in this way that when and especially this what followed by all the forensic department, they get into a shoe of a criminal. So I think that's how you are in love with the Lantana to understand it more. So I would put it that way. Second is I would also like to put it this way that it's also about prioritizing, which I think you are trying to answer that way. That which problem we have a lot of problems, so which problems to prioritize when it comes to the spread, and that's how we would get to know that there are different types of species. So you also talked about the removal, and then Kavita also has this follow-up comment and a question. And I'm going to combine my own observation also with that. I've come across to this beautiful video in Australia where there was a drive to remove, again, the invasive species from one of the forests. Okay, so So since you both are working in Lantana for quite a good amount of time or invasive species, has there been any kind of drives which are being practiced in India? And Kavita has suggested that, can we have NCC cadets, because they have that physical strength, and I'm sure there would be multiple aspects involved, like intervention in the protected areas and the aspects like that. But anything on this front, either of you would like to share anything that has been carried out in India? Whatever the best approach that we have so far, Dr. Divya has taken us through different approaches of removing Lantana. So whatever the best approach we have so far, has it been implemented by outsiders than the forest department?
Yeah, Divya, you want to go first?
Well, I think it would actually be helpful to hear from you about, again, because you lived, you've grown up near Mudumalai, and Mudumalai has had, some constant attempt at trying to remove Lantana and some management practices that they've tried over so many years. I think it would be interesting to hear the history there.
Yeah, okay. So to the best of my knowledge, there has not been any systematic drive like this. Maybe 5-10 years ago, it was small amounts of Lantana were cleared, like 5 hectares, 10 hectares every year was cleared under some scheme or the other by the forest department. But all of it, I think, more or less has been reinvaded. But the last 5 years, I think the scale has increased. They're removing larger areas, 50 hectares, 100 hectares they're targeting. But even a park like Mudumalai, we're talking of about 20,000, 30,000 hectares. So even removing 100 hectares is not that significant. So I don't think there has been any systematic effort. I think Dr. Rajesh I saw here, Mudumalai had a very interesting approach of using elephants trying to train the elephants to pull out the Lantana. But I think maybe the elephants, it's a very thorny plant, and I think maybe the elephant's trunk also was getting slightly injured, and I don't know if they stopped it. But if Dr. Rajesh is here, he could maybe tell us a little more about that intervention. He's a very enlightened vet in Mudumalai. He's very interested in wider conservation issues, an excellent person. I saw him in the audience.
Yeah, he's online.
Yeah, okay. But very quickly, other than that, in terms of getting NCC cadets and things like that, I don't think that is feasible, sadly. It's a very thorny plant that's very hard to deal with. And there are NGOs who used to bring volunteers in, and I also used to try to kind of help. But urban people really do not know how to use their hands in the same way, even if it's, I don't know, NCC cadets if they're any better. So it's much more efficient to get local indigenous tribal people to remove. They are just much more skilled and adept at doing it. And if you pay them 500 rupees, it will cost you about 500 rupees to bring NCC cadets from somewhere, put them up and give them food and all that. Instead, you pay that to local people and they will kind of continue to remove. But even all the local people together, the cost is basically 1 lakh a hectare almost for dense Lantana. So even a park like Mudumalai, you're talking of 300 to 500 crores. That amount of money is not available anywhere. So I feel like we have to mechanize to some extent, but mechanize carefully, mindfully, without there being too much damage to the soils and everything, and allowing for regeneration. And hopefully these experiments we're doing will give us more insight into that. Yeah, I think that's the only thing. We just have to approach it very carefully. And the key thing is we did a review 2012 on Lantana across Australia, South Africa, and Asia, and everywhere it's been expanding despite all efforts. There is no kind of case studies of large areas. There are case studies of, chalo, we restored 20 hectares, 100 hectares, 50 hectares nicely. It worked very nice, but no case studies of a scale where they've managed to remove Lantana and keep it out. So I feel like this approach of getting people to use the plant much more widely for biomass and everything and create an economy around it, but very carefully again. Right? For a long time, we struggled to ensure that protected areas were not seen as a resource where people just take out timber and sell it. That was the colonial view of forests. We've come a long way from there. So we don't want to say, okay, private players just go in and remove Lantana wholesale. Very mindfully, making sure there's kind of employment and local tribal communities through eco-development committees and forest rights committees, those kind of village-based institutions, they start removing and get a livelihood through selling the plant in various forms. I think that's the only way that's going to really make a significant impact. Thanks. I don't know if Dr. Rajesh is here and he wanted to respond about elephants. That would be interesting if he can.
Hello.
Hello, Dr. Rajesh, சொல்லுங்க. You are going to please share Mudumalai history.
Yeah, am I audible?
Yeah.
Hello.
Yes, yes, you're audible.
Yes.
Yes, coming to the point of using elephants, just we want to engage elephants in some activities. That is the prime reason we use it for removing the lantana. Otherwise, it is not possible to use elephants to remove such a huge hectare of lantanas. It's just a part only. And now, as Tarsh said, we stopped it because they also got injured, especially on the trunk and in the eyes also. So the matter of using elephant for lantana removal is out of question now. And I also want to add upon some of my observations regarding lantana. In Mudumalai, they used to create fire line every year. So in that fire line, they used to, depending upon the area, some 20-meter clearance will be there or 10 meters. In some place, 50 meters will be there. In that area, we don't see any invasive weeds, either lantana or this euphorbium or this parthenium. In some part of Mudumalai, where lantana is continuously removed on the same stretch of land, this euphorbium take over. That whole area is covered with euphorbium weeds. Then when we remove that euphorbium also, then this parthenium takes over. So it's a kind of succession. I don't know, but firing definitely, it seems it is working. That very well we can appreciate in the fire line. There only the native grass outgrows all these three species. In the fire line, they used to clear the weeds and they burn it every year. This is the thing they're doing there. And another one observation I made is, inside the vials, there is no invasion of lantana. The vials, we know that they have water around the air, and always they will be holding a high degree of moisture. Only on the peripheries, from the peripheries, the intensity keep on rising up to in the outside areas. So vials are it's not a habitat for lantana. And another thing I want to add upon is, as Divya said, that they have a high plasticity, they are able to adapt and grow in different climates and topography. So if at all we want to go for an eradication program, that should be a area specific. Mudumalai, some techniques might be working. In BRT, some techniques might be working. So I feel that in every landscape, we have to start experimenting, and then only we can get some viable solution. Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rajesh Kumar. So, any other comment you would like to put across, or can I go for the next question?
Go ahead. Next question.
Yeah. So there is one question, from Mr. Ramesh Vijay Raghavan, where he wanted to ask if there any research done on the properties of lantana. I'm sure there would have been. So we would love to hear if anything around properties of lantana, especially like it has a very strong fragrance, so anything has been done on that front. The way Dr. Tarsh has done on using the lantana to create the life-size models of elephant. Likewise, any other properties which have been used to basically do the recreation or any kind of utility that has been done using the properties of lantana.
Yeah, Divya, anything you want to say first, or shall I?
No, not really. I haven't come across studies that have looked at extraction of fragrance or minerals from lantana. The thing that you already mentioned, Sanjay, is that the chemical properties of this have been studied, and really from the perspective of whether it can be eaten by animals is what has been established, in that there are these toxins, but I don't think it really has a fragrance. At least I can't smell it, but I'm also not really sure about minerals. The only way that I know lantana has been used, to cover at least some cost or generate some income is through things like Tasha said, or that Atri is doing with building furniture and building these giant elephants all over London. Tarsh, have you come across something?
Yeah, I mean, in 2011-12, when I was doing the review, I read a crazy number of papers from all sorts of crazy journals about Lantana. And actually, I think there are some, Divya. There are a few papers that look at toxicology primarily. That's a big component. The fact that it is toxic, allelopathic. It puts out chemicals that suppress the growth of other plants. So you can extract some of those chemicals that used as a organic kind of weedicide almost that you can spray to remove other plants. It's also effective against like some kind of microbial activity and things like that. So there are maybe half a dozen papers about its usefulness. There are some oleoresins that can be extracted and used. But the thing is, like the scale is the key issue. Like, is it feasible to extract lantana leaves on scale and extract essential oils from it very quickly or extract certain chemicals from quickly? Is never been done. That's the challenge. They've been like papers have been around for some time. They're all like more than a decade, 2 decades old. But there's been nothing that's moved from there into practice of somebody has set up a business of trying to do something with lantana. There's a person called Vasant who's trying.
Sorry, is this from the leaves?
Yeah, you can, the extracts of the leaves, a lot of people have looked at what can be done with it. But the stems up and the woodiness is perhaps the most economically viable thing because the calorific value is quite high. It's 4,200 kilojoules per kg, I think, is the calorific value, which is good. It's as good as most fuel woods. Eucalyptus is about the same, little less actually. So you can basically use it as a fuel wood, but the thing is, it's so small and low density that you have to convert the form into something else. You have to make briquettes or pellets or something out of it and then do it. So those are key things we're trying to experiment. So that's what we find. If the community can remove the whole plant, shred it and sell the biomass, there is potential there to recover enough money to almost at least highly subsidize the removal process or even potentially pay for the entire removal process. That's what we're also kind of looking into, whether that is feasible. But they have to use some amount of machinery to, like if you uproot one plant of lantana, it will fill up one whole pickup and it will be barely 50 kilos. What you spend on diesel to take the pickup to bring it and come won't even cover the cost of what you sell that lantana for. Like 2 rupees 50 paisa a kilo, you'll get 125 rupees. But you have to basically pulverize it and load a pickup up full.
Yeah.
So you can bring out significant quantities. That's the stuff we're looking at to see if we can create a value chain around lantana in that way. And hopefully in a year or so, we'll have more information about that.
Yeah, I'll just add to this. So from the community work that we do in WWF in this landscape, there is one of my colleagues, Stefan Ajay. He works with Adivasi Munetra Sangam in Satyamangalam. And they have been, so again, employing and providing this livelihood to the local community members to clear lantana. They've made briquettes out of it, and done these tests and approached industries simultaneously to see if they would be open to accepting this as a fuel wood as opposed to what they are currently using, which is prosopis. And this clearly has a much higher calorific value, like Tarsh said. And I think that we're trying to get some systems set up in place where again, that sort of economic value chain is set up.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. There's one fleeting reference that Dr. Tarsh has made about somebody from Assam. Would you like to share that once again?
Sorry, I didn't get, what was it about Assam?
So you made a reference about somebody trying to do something from Assam with lantana. Did I hear it correctly? You are on mute, Tarsh.
Sorry, no, I don't think I mentioned Assam.
Okay.
Basically, in Dehradun, there's some amount of HESCO has done some work with lantana furniture and stuff like that. In Corbett, they've removed and kind of opened up grasslands a bit. So that's all very low density lantana where this cut rootstock method works. It's not like BRT and all that's absolutely dense. No, I don't think I mentioned anybody else who.
Okay,
there are lots of papers basically published on the potential of using extracts from lantana, but I haven't seen anything that's converted from like theoretical paper at very small scale to large scale kind of use in the forest.
Right.
The person from UP, sorry, Vasant, maybe that's what I said. The person called Vasant, who's set up a company trying to promote agroforestry and help kind of local people, primarily farmers, gain livelihoods from planting native plants and trees. And he's looking into, for Lantana also, will something be possible? And they're looking into extracts at the moment from a kind of commercial perspective. Thanks.
Right. Maybe I heard Vasant as Assam, so that could be a possibility. Nonetheless, it's a theoretical question, but I'm very, very keen to understand, especially both of you have been studying Lantana and the other issues with respect to conflict and other invasive species, other problems other than Lantana, which need to be put together. So when we look at the science, when we look at the perception, there's community involvement, and we are talking about practice. Okay, question. It's a theoretical question, but I would love to have you answer. So what are the key learning for you, for over a period of time when you're putting all this together to convert into practice and then take it forward, and still there is a huge room for doing a lot of things, So what are your, key findings which you would like to share with the audience? And if somebody would like to, use that and take it forward in their respective field, one of the things which I learned from today's talk is definitely the patience is a virtue, that something is applicable to me and I'm taking it forward. So anything that you would like to share, both of you, we would love to hear that.
Yeah, Divya, I'll let you go first again.
Thank you, Sanjay, for that, thought-provoking question. And I'm glad that the patience thing stuck with you. For me, it's actually been, so I think that Tarsh and I come from sort of different schools of study or science. We may both have PhDs, but, again, like I mentioned at the beginning, I really come from a pure science kind of thing, or everything that I studied for my master's or for my PhD were common species, lesser known species, and sort of science for science research. And it was really only like towards the end of my PhD or after that I started exploring and wanted to really become more of an applied scientist or a researcher or a conservationist. And I think for me, one of the talk is really what's been on my mind, and I feel like I've already spoken a lot about it. For me, the main challenge, main learnings have been and continue to be really this bridging, between the two things. So while my training and my gut is constantly telling me, to prioritize and develop these scientific studies, what I really like even in scientific studies, I've always liked the challenge of experimental design. So I think it has a lot of power in short periods of time with just some innovation and creativity to actually, because time is of essence and resources and logistics, all of these are constraints generally. And so I think experimental design that way has a lot of potential and a lot of power in being able to generate results fast enough and still relevant and inform management decisions. And for me, it's really been about trying to, use that potential and think. That's something I've always liked about science, is to be able to think creatively and think out of the box for science. And I think that Tarsh, for example, brings another completely different side of innovation, which maybe he'll talk about or he's too humble to talk about. But I think that kind of innovation where he's constantly trying to think of other ways we can, like this income generating or like this kind of awareness generating by building these giant elephant structures out of Lantana would have never occurred to me. And so I think that all of these, for me, one of the biggest learnings is how to get my own learning and my skill and my training in order to meet the urgency and the requirement that is ground reality. I think I'm really in that right now. Tarsh?
Thanks, Divya. That's very generous of you. But to be honest, like my trajectory has been more be very activist kind of started an NGO. We wanted to do things on the ground. We used to do all these activities. And then I took a step back to say, hang on, are we doing the right thing? Right? And I think that's a very relevant question. That's something that, yeah, so my trajectory has been different. And to give you a very good example, like we were maybe not doing the right thing for a long time. Like we started our furniture unit in 2008-9. At the same time, Mudumalai was becoming a tiger reserve. The field director, it was funded. Our theory of change was very much, we just want to be catalysts. We'll enable the forest department and other local people to do as much as they can. We were more like an activist group than a formal funded NGO. And so the eco-development committees were funded by the forest department to start furniture. The chief secretary of the state bought the furniture, and there was huge fanfare about, oh, what a great program this is. It sounds great. But 10 years later, it made no difference at all. And that's when I went in and said, hang on, like, what is the scale of the problem? How long has Lantana been in the forest? Is this ever going to make a difference? Is it going to clear enough Lantana, or is Lantana kind of the state of Lantana changing constantly that it needs an urgent intervention, or is it been the same always and it's nothing to worry about, that kind of thing? So I think with lots of intervention, it's very important to kind of have science go along with it. That looks takes a more broader perspective, looks at things from a larger perspective. So I think things constantly change, and for me, it's not just science. I think the important thing is if you can keep looking at what you have done yourself and almost take the opposite position of saying, I've done all this because I thought it was a good idea, but let's assume it's a bad idea and try to think about that logically and see if we can make a strong argument of why it's not working. And constantly challenge your own assumptions and beliefs. I think that's a really good, something I still keep trying to kind of achieve for myself. It's very hard to do both. To be very driven and say this, I really need to do this. It's such a good idea. I have to work really hard on it, but then also take the opposite position of saying maybe it's a really bad idea. We can think about it. But just quickly on our furniture, yeah, basically it wasn't working and we realized it wasn't working and we tried to look at why it's not working. I think there's some fundamental assumptions there that were problematic about indigenous communities and tribals. Like we assume that most people, if you give them an opportunity to make more money, they will take it. The furniture program was designed from that perspective that they can make more money making furniture than anything else they do. But we looked at two families actually over the year very closely, a kind of ethnographic approach of what all livelihoods they did. And we found they do like something like 16 activities. Like accessing the public distribution system, for example, ration shops is also an activity. They spend 2 full days of a month going there. They go for migrant labor somewhere. They work for the forest department somewhere. They do a whole lot of activities. And we correlated how much they get with each activity to how much time they spend. And there was a slight negative correlation. They spend a lot of time collecting, say, wild foods or whatever, which do not give them any remuneration. And you look at how much calorific value, how much nutrition they get from it also, it's much cheaper to spend a day working and then buy that food off the market. But what motivates them basically was that they were not that, the reason they chose to do certain activities was not based on money. They need little money to survive and they were getting that and they were getting anyway free rice, so they don't need too much work. So any intervention that you plan based on certain assumptions, those assumptions may be fundamentally wrong if you go and look at them carefully. And it's very important to keep looking at that and kind of assessing what works. So basically, like now with the elephants, what we have is it's the change from each person needs to work on Lantana to it's a group activity. So 6 people work together. At any given time, only 3 people will be working, 3 people will be doing some other work. They can fall in and out and keep kind of exchanging with each other, and the work keeps going. And they have a source of income, but it's not dependent on everybody working very continuously for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months to produce a large order and deliver it. It fits in with their life cycle where they can do multiple other things and also work on the elephants. But the elephants keep getting delivered on time. They keep making because it's a group of people together. So yeah, I think questioning assumptions is just something that I keep trying to do, and I find it very interesting and hard or challenging also to keep doing that. I think that is one of the most important things that everybody should do as a scientist and just as a ordinary human being person as well. It's a really important approach. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Divya, and thank you, Tarsh. It's really interesting to hear from both of you. And as I said, one of the key takeouts for me is the patience, and the other, which I have gotten just now from both of you, is the science, is questioning your assumptions. And it's really interesting for anything that one would like to aspire to do constructively. So I think we are done with our questions. So I would request Naveen to just close the event.
Yes. So yeah. So
Sorry, Naveen. Sorry.
Yeah.
Before we close the event, I think it's very interesting because this is an ongoing thing. So I would request Naveen if we can have like a yearly reminder or something like that, and we can invite both of them again. It will be very interesting to hear from them. What is the what is the whole perspective that what they are doing now and what will be after 1 year, and that will be really interesting for not just for audience, but for everybody who's involved now and then. So I would really request you if we can do that and invite them once again.
no, definitely. I think for people who've been following Friends of Elephants, I think it's been going on since 2014. Even when I was not there, I think Verma sir was been involved from 2014, and we have invited multiple people many times over, because as part of the takeaways is, things constantly change. Like we start with certain work, we conclude certain things, then again as part of our work, again we come to a conclusion that that may not be totally true, and again we keep changing, we keep learning. So it's very important to kind of as part of keep sharing our learnings and build upon that, because I think that's how we can come to some kind of as a group try to solve certain problems. Otherwise we just can't be stagnant with just one thought and one kind of learning, and this is it. So sure, I mean, thank you, Dr. Divya and Dr. Tarsh, for spending almost close to 2 hours with us. And I think it's been a very good learning for all. I mean, people who are part of science, and even for people from other walks of life to at least have a picture of what is the problems associated with Lantana. So thanks a lot, and we would definitely hope to have you back in the future. So thanks a lot.
Thank you. And
Thank you
thanks
so much.
everyone.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I just conclude the session now. Thanks for everybody who participated, and the recording will be uploaded on YouTube. So I will share the link once it's been uploaded. Thanks again. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.